David, thank you for that. You said, Pastor Jason's coming, and David said, yes! That makes me excited, man. I hope I'm as good as you think I'm going to be today. Hey, welcome to Harvest today. I'm so glad that you're here. Oh, my goodness. Sundays are so much more fun with you, and I'm just enjoying seeing your faces again. Like, I really am. I forgot what some of you looked like, and you look better than I remember, honestly. So, COVID was good to you, I guess, but so glad that you are here today. I forgot to do this last week, but I want to say congratulations to all of our graduates. We have several high school and college graduates, and so proud of you. Lots and lots of hard work to get to that point, and we just want to say congratulations. There may or may not have been a graduation party where your pastor was the impromptu DJ, and him and his wife may or may not have danced. There may or may not be incriminating video evidence of said thing that may or may not have happened. So don't believe it if you hear it or if you see it. There's an imposter, okay? Thinking of graduates, the most common question that we ask graduates is this: what are you going to do next, right? I went to a graduation party last Sunday and was asking the young man, I'm like, what's next? Where are you going? What do you want to do, right? That's the question that we often ask. And I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but typically the younger you are, the easier it is to kind of dream about the answer to that question. Most kids don't have any problem, answering that question. I asked a 4-year-old this morning, actually. I said, what do you want to be when you grow up? He said, a worker. I'm like, please start dreaming bigger. Right? But most start dreaming really, really young. Like some, maybe growing up, I don't know, did anyone want to be an astronaut? Anyone? You think it'd be fun? No, nobody. Okay. So some kids I want to be an astronaut. So I did some research this week. By I did some research, I mean I went to Google, because you can obviously trust everything that's on the internet. But according to Google, the odds of becoming an astronaut are about 0.04%. So less than half of 1%. Not really good odds, right? I think I'll probably get some on this one. Anyone growing up said, I'm going to be a professional athlete of any sport? Anyone? Any sport except cheerleading. That one doesn't count. You can tell my wife I said that too, okay? A lot of people grow up like, I'm going to be a professional athlete, right? So I read this blog this week called The Chances of Going Pro, and the author wrote this. He said, take football, for instance. Only the top 8% of the top 1% of the top 1% of high school football players will make it to the NFL. That's kind of confusing. I don't know if I lost you in those stats. So he goes on to explain it this way. There's just over 1.1 million high school football players in the U.S. About 6.5% of those, so about 71,000 of the 1.1 million will actually go on to play college. And of those, only 1.2% will be drafted into the NFL. So in short, about 850 players make it into the pros each year out of the original 1.1 million that were playing football in high school saying, I'm going to be the next professional football player. In other words, you're more likely to become an astronaut than a pro football player. And so this just got me thinking this week, about the odds, right? What are the odds? Here's one nobody wants. The odds of being audited by the IRS. Nobody wants that, right? It's higher than I thought. I'll be honest with you. 1 in 160. So about a 0.5%. Ironically, those who claimed $0 on their tax return were audited more often. I mean, the IRS we are on to you, right? The odds of being involved in an accident with a drunk driver is 2 out of 3. That's a sad statistic. Here's one. The odds of being born with 11 fingers or toes, okay? This is far more common than I ever imagined it would be. 1 in 500, okay? 1 in 500. I'm not going to ask you to raise your 11 fingers because it might be embarrassing. The odds of winning the lottery, about 1 in 300 million. The odds of finding a pearl in an oyster, we don't have those around here, but if you're on the beach, 1 in 12,000, right? Anyone ever get LASIK eye surgery? Anyone? I'll tell you a quick story, and then I'll tell you the stat. My wife wanted it, and I was like, yeah, you go ahead. And she was the guinea pig. I'm like, I'm not letting them do a laser on my eyeballs, So she did it. It was safe, so then I did it. The odds of going blind after laser surgery in your eyes, only 1 in 5 million, okay? That's not that bad. The odds of being killed by fireworks, this is coming up, 4th of July is coming up. 1 in 340,733, okay? The odds of being attacked by a shark, 1 in 3.7 million. And here's the one you really need to pay attention to. The odds of being injured by a toilet. This is for real. I would not lie to you. There is an official study published by the CDC about non-fatal bathroom injuries. I inquired the truthfulness of this with one of our plumbers in the church. He confirmed that he is aware of injuries by toilet, okay, in our city. I'm just saying, the odds of an injury by a toilet, 1 in 10,000. That's crazy, right? So here's the lesson, okay? Don't waste your money on the lottery. If you see an oyster, pick it up. It might have a pearl, or if not, you can eat it. If you have 11 fingers or toes, you're not alone. Don't claim 0 on your IRS tax return unless you want to be audited. Be very careful with fireworks. Don't freak out about sharks, especially because we live in New Mexico. And be very careful when you go to the bathroom, okay? That's your public service announcement from Harvest. Why are we talking about all of these odds? A few weeks ago, we talked about a guy in the Bible. He's in Hebrews 11, along with a bunch of others. His name's Abraham. And there's this whole chapter, Hebrews 11, it's full of these great faith stories, right? Abraham and Moses and Noah and Rahab and just all of these amazing, amazing people. And this week, I want to talk to someone. I'm not saying that she's not amazing, but she's not in the book of Hebrews chapter 11. I mean, she's not one of the main characters, right? She's not one of these that has this whole, chapter about her great faith because, let's face it, most of us are not going to have books written about us, right? Most of us are not going to go pro in any sport. Most of us are not going to Mars as an astronaut. Most of us are just kind of regular people, right? And the danger in Hebrews 11, while I love it and I love all the stories of all those characters, is that sometimes we can feel a little disconnected from it because we're like, well, I'm not Abraham. I'm not Moses. I'm not Noah. I'm not these people that had great faith. If Hebrews 11 were being written today, I don't think they'd put my name in it. And so if you look at this story today, I want to look at the story of Hagar. And I'll tell you, I don't think I've ever preached a sermon specifically on Hagar. She's always kind of like a supporting actress in the bigger story of Abraham and Sarah, right? Hagar is, if you don't know, she's the mistreated slave of Sarah. She's really not the main character. And so as I read her story the last couple of weeks, I got to thinking about how God made promises to Hagar, who was not in Hebrews 11, someone who's a supporting actress, so to speak, someone who's not, she's just kind of a regular person. And so today, I thought that might help you and I, a bunch of regular people, to connect with the promises of God. And how do we live them out? How do we hold on to the promises of God? Her story begins in Genesis chapter 16. It says this: Now Sarai, Abram's wife, which by the way, later God changes their names from Sarai and Abram to Sarah and Abraham, okay, in just a couple chapters, so don't get confused here. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne no children. Everyone just say, oh. But she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. Hagar is a number 2, right? Just to help you think again about being in a supporting role, just think back to elementary school recess. I don't know what game you played in elementary recess. We played kickball. Okay, that was our sport. Every recess we played kickball. And if I think back to kickball, okay, I liked when I got to be the captain of the team. Do you remember that? Did you ever get to be the captain? Because if you weren't the captain, everyone else lined up against a wall. You all stood there, and the other two captains began picking the teams. And I'm just telling you, especially in elementary school, the only one that you wanted to be picked was first. Am I right? I mean, if you weren't picked first, you're just kind of like, oh, man, right? And if you were like fourth, or seventh, or like if you were the last one and there was an odd number, right? Did you relate to this at all? You're like, man, nobody likes me, right? Maybe that helps you think about Hagar's position, right? And Sarai has an idea. Here's her idea, verse 2. She says to her husband, Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can have a family through her. That statement, I reread the story this morning. That statement alone just kind of caught my attention. Here's someone who's trying to live out her dreams through someone else. Do you know anyone like that? She's like, go have my slave. Maybe my dreams can be fulfilled through her. By the way, in case you're wondering, this is Genesis chapter 16. This is not an episode of Wife Swap, okay? This was a cultural practice, one I'm thankful we no longer practice today. But this was a cultural practice of giving the slave to the husband. They wanted to produce children. The children would become theirs, and that's how they would do this. But just notice, because for months now, we're talking about the promises of God. We're still talking about the promises of God. And what's happening here is that Sarai is trying to shortcut the process to get to God's promise. I don't know if you've ever tried to do that. I'll tell you that I have. You got to be very careful, because God's promises also include God's strategy as well as God's timeline. And often we get to meddling in it and thinking, I'll just help God along. I'll speed this up. If I talk to this person or do this, he's promised me it, so I think I can get there a little bit faster. And that's what Sarai's doing here. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar, gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, Sarai's telling Abram, it was her idea, remember, you are responsible for this, the wrong I'm suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. It's interesting how our human tendency is so often to blame others, right? Instantly, Sarai's like, this is your fault, Abram. You did this. It reminds me just a few chapters earlier, the story of Adam and Eve, the very first man and woman. As soon as they got caught, they're pointing fingers, right? Adam's like, she made me do it. And she's saying, the serpent made me do it. I mean, it's just human tendency that we don't own our mistakes. The reality is that what's happening is they're beginning to reap the consequences, Abram and Sarai, of trying to accomplish God's promises on their own terms. And what happens next kind of bothers me. Verse 6, Abram replies to her, says, your slave is in your hands. Do whatever you think is best. And so Sarai mistreated Hagar to the point that she fled from her. Now, let me just tell you why this bothers me. And men, I'm just going to talk to you. Husbands especially, I'm going to talk to you for a second. This is why this part of the story bothers me, is because Abram had no problem when Sarai came and said, hey, sleep with my slave. But then when she comes back and says, I have a problem with this, Abram's like, it's not my problem, right? Do whatever you want. In other words, listen, husbands, listen, men, He gave over his authority to his wife. He took this very passive approach. He's just like, do whatever you want with her. And I'm just going to be honest with you. Men have been doing that same thing ever since Genesis chapter 16. Listen to me, men. There is a role I am not at all taking away from the role that your wife plays. I'm not taking that away at all. I'm just talking to you out of Genesis chapter 16. The role that you have as a husband and as a father is a role that only you can play. No one else can play that role. You can't abdicate that role to your wife or to the grandfather or to some other dude you cannot give that role to anyone else. And I'm reading this story and I'm like, come on, Abram. And remember, Abram's he's in Hebrews 11. He's one of the main characters. But I'm like, come on, dude, man up and lead your family. Got kind of quiet. It's okay though. This message isn't really about Abram or Sarai. They're the main characters. Today's about Hagar. And I love what happens next. Verse 7, the angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It's the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And the angel said, Hagar, slave of Sarai. It's interesting that the angel refers to her as the slave, right? He says, Hagar, slave of Sarai. Where have you come from and where are you going? And she says, I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai. And the angel told her, listen to what the angel said, go back to your mistress and submit to her. By the way, so often God asks us to do the hard things, right? We're running away from reality. That's what Hagar's doing, right? She's running away from pain. She's running away from this. And the angel of the Lord comes and says, go back and do the hard thing. Go back and submit. You're being abused. You're being mistreated. But I want you to go back and to submit. And then it says, the angel added a promise. I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. They asked her to do a hard thing, but then God gives her a promise. And the angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. What a description. I think the nurses said that of me, actually. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. She names the Lord. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I love this phrase, I have now seen the one who sees me. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son that she had born. So what can we learn from Hagar, a supporting actress, about holding on to the promises of God? Here's the first thing I want to make sure you hear today is this. God makes personal promises. He makes personal promises. I mean, God had already made a promise. We didn't read it, but he made a promise to Abram and Sarai. But this wasn't the promise to Abram and Sarai. This was the promise to Hagar. Remember, the angel says to Hagar, I am going to increase your descendants so much so that you won't even be able to count them. It actually sounds a lot like the promise that God made to Abram and Sarai. But this is not their promise. This is Hagar's promise. And I love that we serve a God who loves all of us, but he also loves each of us. Isn't that pretty cool? I mean, while God loves everyone, like his eyes roam to and fro across the earth. Like he's paying attention, right? In every state, in every country, in every city, in every suburb, in every nook and cranny of the world. He loves everybody. But the beautiful thing is, he loves you. He loves you. He loves you. He even loves people that sit in the balcony. Can you believe that? He even loves people that watch online. Right? He loves every single one of us. And here's why this is important is to this point in our series, the promises that we've talked about are kind of these these big blanket promises that like all of us, they apply to all of us. All of us can grab a hold of and say, yes, that is my promise. Here it is in God's word. I'm going to pray that promise. I'm going to hold on to that promise. But that's not actually what I'm talking about today. What I'm talking about today is that God makes us very personal promises. Very personal promises. Now here's the deal. So many of us would say, wow, I want a personal promise. I don't want just the average blanket promise that everyone gets. Like, I want my own promise for me and my family. And I'm going to tell you the secret, okay? The only way to get a personal promise is to get personal with God. It's how it works. Is that as you spend time, as you develop intimacy, as you engage with God on a regular basis, that's where all of a sudden he begins to share things with you for you and your family and your marriage and your children and your business and your future. And all of a sudden God will begin to share with you. I mean, it's so personal. Our littlest one, Eden, she's not even little anymore, but she's our littlest one. She's always loved secrets, always. I mean, always. And she was little, especially. She'd pull you in close, right? And she'd get right up in your ear and just. But she wasn't good at whispering, so everyone could hear it. But we pretended just. It was so special. It was such a special moment as she would whisper these things in your ear. And here's what happens: is as you put yourself in a place where you're spending time with Jesus regularly, which is just code for you're praying and you're reading your Bible, right? I mean, it's not really that complicated. Like, don't let this be super complicated today. You're just spending time with it. As he does, what happens, right, is the Holy Spirit leans in and he pulls you close and he whispers in your ear and he begins to share some very personal promises. Here's a promise about personal promises. James chapter 4, verse 8. It happens to be our theme verse for this year. Harvest is James 4:8. It says, come near to God and he will come near to you. This is a promise about getting personal promises, right? That as you come near, as you spend time with the Lord, he then comes near to you. And I just want you to know today that God makes personal promises. It's one of the things I see in the story of Hagar. The second thing is this. I struggle with how to communicate this, but I think you'll get it, is God makes promises to number ones and number twos, okay? Here's what I'm saying. Hebrews 11, which we've been in for a few weeks now, it's all the number ones, right? It's the big, like Moses and Abraham and Noah, like the big, primary characters. And again, I think if we're not careful, we read those stories and we just go, but that's not me, right? God didn't call me to build an ark. God didn't call me to lead the, hundreds of thousands of people across the desert to the promised land. Like, that's not the role that I'm playing. And I just wanted to bring to your attention today, they're not the only ones that get promises from God. God has personal promises for the Hagars of the world. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying anyone's more important than others. What I'm saying is most of us are in supporting roles. I'll say it this way. I'll bring it into my world, okay? In my world, what a bunch of pastors do is we compare ourselves to kind of the number ones of the world. We compare ourselves to the Stephen Furticks or the T.D. Jakes or the Skip Heitzicks or, all these big name, big churches. We compare ourselves to them. And I'm just telling you, if I'm not careful, I'll discount the gift that God has given me because I'm so busy comparing myself to everyone else. In fact, I'll make you aware of the ploy of the enemy is that you can't be your best self while you're comparing yourself to someone else. You can't be who God created you to be. So I can moan and complain, and I don't have as many followers as T.D. Jakes, and not as many people are listening to my podcast as Stephen Furtick's, which is really funny to say out loud. But I can say all that, or I can just embrace that I'm the only Jason Dickinson on the planet. Some of you are like, thank God you're the only one. My mom's like, yes, We cannot take more of you, right? Listen, some of you today, you feel like Hagar, you feel like you've been overlooked by God, right? You feel like you're in a supporting role and everyone's just forgotten about you. I mean, you're busy behind the scenes. You're doing things and no one's really paying attention to you today. And I just love this part of the story where it says this: the angel of the Lord found Hagar. I just have to highlight this word, found. The angel of the Lord found Hagar. That means that the angel was looking for her, right? That means Hagar was on God's radar, right? That means he knew what was happening and he goes searching. In fact, this is a theme of the Bible, right? Is that we serve a God who comes looking for us. Probably one of my favorite chapters in the Bible is Luke chapter 15. It's about things that are found, lost and found, right? You've got the lost son, you've got the lost coin, right? You've got the lost sheep, and all three of them paint this beautiful picture. It's not really about a sheep or a coin or, it's about you and I. It's about our hearts. That when we are far from God, he doesn't just sit back and go, well, I hope they find their way back. He comes searching for you. I just want you to know today, if you feel overlooked like Hagar had to have felt, that you are on God's radar, that he knows where you're at, that he's paying attention to your story. In fact, listen to how Hagar responds to the angel again. She says, "You are the God who sees me." And then she says this, I have now seen the one who sees me. I don't know if parents, if you ever do this, but sometimes like in a crowded room, I'll notice my children, across the room getting into trouble, right? As kids will often do. And if I can get their eyes, right, which most often they know not to look at us, but if I can get their eyes, I'll sometimes just do this. I'll go. You ever do that? Any parents? Or you have your own version of that signal? Maybe yours is like, right? Or, I don't like, I don't know what your signal is, right? My signal to the girls in that moment, right, is, I see you. Right? Like so much can be communicated by that, right? What I'm saying is when we get home, you may not live to your next birthday, right? Why are you so much like your mom? Right? You know that's not true. This is kind of what I think's happening here with Hagar. He's like, I see what you're doing here. Right? I see the one who sees me. I thought I was forgotten. I've been a slave. I've been mistreated. Then I did what I was asked to do, and then I was punished for doing what I was asked to do, and now I'm running for my life, and I just thought I was doing the right thing, but now I see that you see me. Today you might feel forgotten. This is what I want you to see today. Okay? You're seen. You're seen today. The Lord sees you. Here's the third thing about Hagar and holding on to these promises. God is always, just say that word always. God is always working to keep his promises. We have to read ahead a few more chapters to get to the rest of the story. Genesis chapter 21 now, so about 5 chapters later, a bunch of years pass. Most Bible scholars believe between 15 and 17 years pass from Genesis 16 to Genesis 21, because now Genesis 16, Ishmael is in the womb. Genesis 21, now he's grown up. It says Genesis 21 verse 8, the child grew and weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. Isaac's a brother, right? But Sarah, so now God's changed their names, but Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking, and she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac, which just shows us all these years later, Sarah's still regretting her decision to take things into her own hands, right? She's still reaping the consequences of those decisions. Verse 11, the matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it's through Isaac your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he's your offspring. By the way, I just noticed this. Abraham learned his lesson, because remember the first time he abdicated his leadership. He said, Sarah, do whatever you want. This time he goes to God and he inquires, what am I supposed to do? And God says, don't worry about this. In other words, I got it. It's in my hands. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and he sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and he wandered in the desert of Beersheba. And when the water in the skin was gone, they're out of supplies, in other words, she put the boy under one of the bushes and she went off and she sat down about a bow shot away, okay? Which, if you don't shoot bows and arrows, it's not very far. She's close by, right? Where she thought, I can't do this. I cannot watch my boy die. And as she sat there, the scripture says she began to sob. So again, Hagar's feeling forgotten, alone. What is going on, right? She had to have been second-guessing the personal promise that was made to her through this angel all those years before. She's at the end of her rope. She's desperate. She's tired. She's frustrated. And if I could put myself in Hagar's shoes, I mean, I'm asking questions as I'm sitting there under the tree, right? I'm going, why have you abandoned me? You made me a promise. Did you mean that promise? Right? Why did you leave me? Why are you making my son pay for this? I mean, what's going on here? Do you see that in the story? Do you feel the turmoil, the pain that Hagar's feeling? And verse 17 says this, God heard the boy crying. So you just need to know this today. God sees you and God hears you. They heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, so again, it's very personal, right? God's interacting with Hagar. This is an intimate moment, this conversation. God says, what's the matter, Hagar? Don't be afraid. God's heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him a great nation. In other words, he reiterates the promise that was made 15, 16, 17 years back. He's pointing her back to this promise. I'm still going to keep my word. I'm still going to give you so many offspring that they're not going to be able to count. I'm still going to develop Ishmael into a nation. And I love this, verse 19. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw the well of water. So she went, and she filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. Here's what I want you to see today, is that God is doing more than you can probably see. He's always at work to keep his promises. And so often we are like, what is going on? I don't see the results. I don't see you working. Like this, and they don't add up. And what's happening here? And I just want to remind you today that God's always at work. He's doing more than you can see. I don't know in this story, we don't have the detail to know. Was the well there the whole time and she couldn't see it? Or did God, because he could do this, did he snap his fingers and just like, bam, create a well, right? We don't know, okay? But I have a theory, and my theory is that the well was already there, and here's why, is because so often when we're in crisis, all we see is the crisis in front of us. It's so hard when you're in the middle of deep pain to realize all that's really around you. To realize, I'll say it this way, when you're in the middle of pain, it's hard to see the goodness of God around you. When you're in the middle of pain, it's hard to see the people that God's put in your life that are there to help you. All you see is the people who've hurt you, not the people that want to help you. All you see is the bad stuff and not the good stuff. Have you ever been there? And so I think what happened is all of a sudden, as God's presence came close to Hagar, she became aware again of the goodness of God. And all of a sudden, she began to see. And all of a sudden, she goes, oh, wait a second. It's not as bad as I thought. We're not actually out of water. There's a well right there. Weeks ago, I don't know, months ago, maybe at this point, I was teaching out of Psalm 23, and you remember this, where it says this, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. And I'm just telling you, for me personally, there was a turning point, even as I preached that verse, because as I preached it, I had this image in my head. I shared it that day. You might have been here. I shared it that day. How crazy is it that as we're going about our lives and doing our things and going to the grocery store and going to work and doing that, as we're doing that the goodness and mercy of God are following us, right? And I made a joke that day. I was like, man, when something good happens, just kind of look over your shoulder like, oh, there it is. There's a goodness of God, right? I'll just tell you what happened is it kind of started as just being funny and me joking about it. But what happened is all of a sudden, when I would see the goodness of God, I would go, oh, look at that. You know? And there's some people here that have been around me when I've done it. I'll go, Jace, would you look at that? And he'll go, the goodness of God, right? Can I tell you why I'm telling you this? Is when you're in pain, it's so hard to see the goodness of God, but it's not because the goodness of God isn't there. The goodness of God, Psalm 23 tells, it's following you through every part of your life, through the good parts, through the bad parts. The problem is so much of the time, we don't realize that it's there because we're caught up in our own pain and turmoil. I just tell you today to look behind you and to see that the goodness of God is following you, because God is always, always, always working to fulfill his promises. God opens Hagar's eyes and she begins to see. I'm praying for you today that if you feel forgotten, abandoned, alone, I mean, just put your adjective in there. If you've been wondering, like maybe you have a promise from God and you've been holding on to it for quite some time, and today you're wondering, like, what in the world is this going to happen? God, did you mean it? Did I hear you wrong? I don't know if you pray prayers like that. That's kind of how I pray sometimes. Like, God, maybe I missed it. Like, I thought this is what you promised for me and my family. What's going on here? If that's you today, I especially want to pray over you. Here's what we're going to do. In fact, why don't you stand with me? Our worship team is going to help us, and we're going to sing one worship song. It really is, it's just to help to get you in a place where you can just really open your heart to what God has for you. Now that you've heard his word, now we're going to open our heart to see what God wants to do in our lives. And so as we sing this song, as we worship this song, I want to pray. I want to pray for you. And I will tell you this, I have one thing that after this, it's like the last part of my message, one thing I'm going to share with you before I pray with you. I just want you to begin to position your heart, especially if you came in today feeling like maybe God's not going to keep his word. Maybe God has abandoned me. Maybe everyone else has abandoned me. And I'm feeling, I'm a number 2. Or today you might be going, I'm not even a 2. Like I'm a 3 or a 4. Like nobody knows where I'm at. I feel like today that God's going to whisper in your ear as you make room for him, and he's gonna affirm you and say, I see you. I hear you. And for some of you, he's gonna make a personal promise to you, one that you can hold on to because he always keeps his word. Are you ready for this? All right. Worship team, help me. Let's worship, and then I'm going to come back up and we're going to